we've got a fair bit to get going through, and we're not going to get through everything, we don't think, but we'll get through what we can. So, first question is, um, I trust Neil's identification of the tree. I don't have enough there to identify it, and it's one of those trees that's in an area well outside of my operating, so I don't care. But I'm and I think you're right. I think it's a Ladeoporus portentosus. Um, and the reason for it is the shape more than anything else. The thing is, Niels, is if that was a curry puff, rub your fingers on that, you would smell it. Sample. I have them dried here, and they'd be 12 years old or more, and they still smell beautiful. Um, you still get that curry smell. I don't know how long it lasts for. What is interesting, I did say a note, and for goodness sakes, be careful if you're in Victoria, but that this whole family, the old Piptoporus family, was all edible. But I do recommend caution, particularly if you're putting them into a beef Wellington, that you check, first of all, further before you do that. But I can see these being edible, particularly this when it comes out. It's very soft and quite malleable. And if you look at your one carefully, and I did zoom in on it so we could have a closer look, there's no holes in the bottom of it. That means this is probably only a couple of days old, if that. The gnats haven't come in and destroyed it. The beetles haven't come in. And both of them will do that very rapidly after it forms. Within a matter of a day or so, they're in there giving it a go. So you'll see it teeming with mats fairly shortly afterwards. It dries out over time and it just looks like polished styrofoam. They don't stay on, so they form very rapidly. The other thing you'll notice is if you look at the underside of them, you'll often see water glistening. And the function of that water is the tree uses water to stop the spread of fungus. Where you get water, you get no fungus, where it's saturated. So if I can suck out a whole pile of water, which the sporocarp itself does, its sporocarp probably weighs 5 or 6 kilograms. So it's taken out probably 3 or 4 kilograms of water in that process, and it'll pull out even more on the undersurface and let it evaporate. So very good at trying to get the environment to grow in. It tends not to be a problem. Remember that. It's just one that we monitor. You should be able to tap and sound it if it's been there for a couple of years. And generally the tree will pick up on it. It's not like other brown rots that we get, like Phaeolus. You don't see it cause failure of the tree very often at all. So it's just one to be cautious about and to monitor. If I was climbing it, or if you were recommending someone to climb it, I'd recommend load caution. So load light, don't try and take out, a third of the tree in one go. I think that's probably pushing the friendship. But otherwise, not a bad problem.
How do they spread normally throughout the whole trunk, and is it kind of
usually a column in the middle? So you get a tube in the middle of brown rot, and it's usually not a problem. The tree seems to pick it up fairly early. So, I've seen them with just very early sporocarps, and you can sound them with your sounding mallet, and you can hear that there is degradation going on. And as I said, let's be honest, most cavities don't fail, most hollows don't fail. That's not the norm. And I was at a presentation down in, I think it was Melbourne, it was in Canberra at the conference with the Hollow Hog. I don't know whether you've seen it, but great little device. You've got one, haven't you, Niels? Have you?
Yeah. I make lots of hollows.
Yeah. And they were saying they've only had a couple of trees fail out of the thousands that have been hollowed. And so when you think about it, there's a man-made rapid change, almost at the sort of level that fire does. So we're getting these rapid changes and the trees aren't failing. So, I think that gives us a fairly good idea that they're, these decay fungi that we have are largely not problematic. Oh, we've got another mentor with us, Jeremy Young. G'day. Have we got any other mentors with us? No, Jeremy's there, but I haven't heard his voice yet. He'll come through. Okay. Next question is, what's happening with this tree? And he says there's a patch of bark missing all the way down one side of the trunk, but
It's pretty much going almost all the way down to the ground, but not quite.
all the way down to the ground. And then there's this foul-smelling smell. And you said like wet wood in you get in elms and things like that. And the answer is yes. I think you're right. I think it's a lightning strike. What we've learned about lightning strike is really quite fascinating. When I started, we thought that it was lightning going down the trunk, hitting the wood up, the steam causing evaporation and blowing the tree to pieces. We now know that it's a pressure wave that does it. So that bang after the lightning's gone past, coming back in, is what pushes and hits. And if you want to take a bark off a tree, you just felled a tree, you get the back end of your axe and you start beating on the bark to make it come off. So that's essentially what the pressure wave has done. It's caused some damage. Then you get these secondary things that are produced, and in this case, kino. And kino has that smell you're talking about. So this tree was trying to defend itself, and that's that red oozing stuff you talk about. And it's a polyphenol, and it just does have an unpleasant smell to it. So I assume that's what you were smelling.
And the you can see on that step cut the half of it on the left side, the heartwood is really discolored as well. It's really dark.
Yeah.
Not like normal heartwood, but just from that event. I don't know if that's
I can see that. And it's possible that's something else, but that's what it looks like from my side. Is you've just had, and then this is just altered in the process of what's been going on. I suspect there's been some microorganisms go in. The first thing that you've got, of course, is you've got a lot of sapwood. So sapwood is wood with living parenchyma in it still. And when living parenchyma gets disrupted, it dies, it becomes a valuable food source. And that's why we knock off, for example, the sapwood when we're quarter sawing, because we don't want the insects that attack sapwood to come in. So when I was a young fella, we would have hardwood fence palings, and you'd see these beautiful white strips where they still had sapwood attached, and they would always disappear in no time at all. Nowadays, you won't ever see that in the process. And your last question, I think, is a really good question, and I make it a bit larger for you. Sorry, guys, I should have done that. Please ask, because I know some of you are on smaller devices. But we've got this eucalyptus with a codominant stem, and Niels says, look, he's not worried about this union, but should he think about subordinating and taking it back to a single trunk? My answer to that is no, leave alone. I went down this week to have a look at one where somebody had put a couple of slings, one around each side, and joined them in the middle with a D-shackle, and they were just nice and loose. They were worried about it potentially failing. But the information now tells us that these sort of unions seldom fail. They fail no more regularly than normal, perfect, ideal, rounded unions during cyclonic conditions. So my view is that's what the tree looks like. Get people used to having multiple stem trees. I was
kind of thinking that maybe with girth increase, over the next 20 years or something, they will start pushing against each other. But obviously that's not something that I know that you can foresee. But I could see that union becoming worse in the future. And then I was wondering, would you be better off trying to subordinate that side now rather than in 20 years?
I'm really
definitely like the no cut approach.
My gut level feeling is no. My gut level feeling is the tree will deal with it. And my other gut level feeling is even if you get included bark, it's probably not going to be bad. And my gut level feeling is that sometime in the next 20 years, we'll come up with a system of inserting an artificial plastic block in here and allowing the new wood to grow over the top there. And I think I've showed you pictures of a letterbox doing that. Those of you who haven't seen, I'm happy to show it if you want, just ask. But I suspect that that's what will happen if this is a problem in time. I suspect that in the next 20 years we'll be doing synthetic grafts higher up that changes that curvature of that union. So we're no longer using above ground bracing, but natural wood to do the job. And I don't think that's that far away. So by the time you're an old man, you'll look back and say, why do they use cables for? We've certainly seen a lot of changes in the earlier days. Every union that was co-dominant like this, we'd sit there and say, oh, you should brace it. And I guess by the time I'd done that a few hundred times and things didn't fail, I started to feel embarrassed. And I remember one outside the Forestry Commission, which is where I did my first course with Phil Hadlington. And I drive up the driveway and I think, well, that's got to be removed. And Hugh Taylor braced it with bolts about 15 years ago, and I really lost it and said, I was just waiting to see whether that thing was ever going to fail. So I think that's one of the things that we do is if you look at what hasn't failed, not what's failed, what hasn't failed is probably more informative for you. And I would just leave it, let it be. It looks like a great tree, and I would see no point. If you were talking about the tree when it was this high, I would say, yeah, probably makes sense at that stage to let it revert back to a single stem with some formative pruning. But this is past formative pruning stage. Could you do it? The answer is yes. I'd probably cut somewhere up about here, get rid of some of that, come back a few years later down to here, then down to this one, then down to this one. And I'd probably shorten that one out because by then I've made this too rigid. So probably 4 or 5 visits if I wanted to do it in a really nice manner. 2 or 3 as a minimum. This process of coming in and taking that whole section out, I don't have an issue with it. If you're going to put a building in there and it has to go in one go, or they're putting in power lines and it has to go in one go and they don't have the time. But if you've got the time, little and more frequently is definitely the way to do tree work. So does that answer all your questions? Oh, no.
Last one, sorry. Be happy with that one. That's just a general...
Phoenix palms, general recommendations. First of all, no spikes. I just think climbing palms with spikes is tacky. It makes them look like they're junkies. I was just up in Cairns earlier this month and late last month. And, if I wanted to see palms that looked like junkies, I'd go down to King's Cross and see them. This is just no spikes. Next thing is sterile conditions. Before I cut and after I cut, my saws need to be sterilised, and they need to be sterilised with a number of different things. My favourite ones, methylated spirits and water, 30% metho, 70% water. Spray it on, let it dry. Only takes a few minutes, and clean your saw out, give it a wash down. You can clean everything up with it, including your hands. It wasn't that long ago we were using a 30% carrier and 70% methylated spirits to do our hand sanitizers. It's exactly the same thing, except we use a gelatinous form. We use something like an agave or an aloe, polysaccharide to make the process sticky. But yeah, so sterilize your equipment. If you're in Sydney, and I suspect you're going to get it down in the coastal areas of Melbourne fairly soon if you haven't, we have lesser coconut weevil. There's talk of a second insect problem in Sydney. So waiting to see what that comes back with from DNA testing. But remove the dead fronds, and the ideal is to cut relatively short. So, 100 to 150 mils from the trunk. Second one is there is a second fungus that will damage Phoenix palms in particular. It's a pineapple fungus, which sounds really obscure, but they're both monocots. There's some commonality there. And things like kingfishers and rats and birds that eat into the stem go past that peridome, that outside edge. So just here, that's a hard outer layer that's trees one bark effectively. It's not a bark in the sense we think about it, but it's like a bark. That will last for 100+ years. It's really effective. Breach through that, get to some living cells, and introduce a fungus that's mildly pathogenic, and it'll eat the insides of them out. And so we've had a couple destroyed by kingfishers. So we now cut a little bit closer than we used to, just to prevent that. And if you're using, if you're treating up in Queensland or in the coastal areas of Sydney up through the east coast, then consider putting a surface spray on to prevent lesser coconut weevil from being a problem. So then I would say typically every 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years.
What would you use to deter the lesser coconut weevil?
I can say Mortein Outdoor Barrier Surface Spray or the equivalent, because I know I can get away with that. But I know there are people that would like to use and do use in Queensland imidacloprid as a spray.
So just any sort of general insecticide will do the trick.
Any insecticide that's got some degree of residual to it, and you're just trying to stop the coconut weevil coming in. It's worse on green. It's not a problem on dead fronds. So it's just the ones that are green that you cut off. And we tend to, when we do, we'd probably take something like that off, Niels, and that one there, maybe even that one there. You know,
I was going to ask, do you only remove the dead fronds, or?
Look, the amount, the over pruning is a problem. Over pruning is a problem because when the leaf changes color, when it goes from that green to that darker color, or when it goes from green to autumn colors, if we're talking about an autumn plant, there are these little things, little plasters, little membrane enclosed organelles called gerontoblasts, and they're amazing things. They go in and scavenge all the things that they can and take it back into the green plant. So if you're constantly taking off green leaves, you end up with a problem with nutrients. Now, you can supplement that by fertilizing and mulching. So those are things you can do to rectify that. But these leaves have largely served their purpose. So you're going to get a little bit of nitrogen loss. Well, mulch will fix that up fairly quickly. You'll have a moderate a phosphorus loss, and again, the mulch will pick that up fairly quickly. A little bit of potassium loss, again, mulch will pick that up fairly quickly. So if you're in a concrete or lawn area, trying to minimize the number of green leaves is ideal. If you're in a nice organic soil, you can go a little harder, 3-4 runs. And if we're transplanting, we go to 45 degrees. So, all of those below that hand on the other image there, they all go. We want it to cut from the tip of the frond to the petiole base. We want that to be about 45 degrees. Okay. If you're doing something like Livistona or Washingtonia and you want a small root plate, then you'd cut to 6 fronds and a spear, really hard. And same with when we exported Phoenix canariensis to China. Australia did a lot of that during the preparation for their Olympics. They cut them back incredibly hard. It just does cause some stress if you're not careful. And what you'll see then is a thing called hourglassing. I'm pretty sure I can show a picture of that.
So when the trunk kind of narrows down.
Yeah.
Are there any typical things you'd look at from a risk assessment perspective on a palm tree?
No, they're incredibly strong in tensile strength, and I'll okay, there's really bad hourglassing for you. Okay,
It's pretty
yeah,
pretty narrow.
and there's, in theory, there's as many cells there, or almost as many cells. There's a little less parenchyma, but in terms of tensile tissue, it's still much the same, as much fiber, but that's a weakness. So in terms of palms over-engineered. Hopefully everyone has seen the video. I won't play it, but I'll find it for you. Palm swaying pruning.
That hourglass picture you just showed, then, what would that be, a 6 on a likelihood of failure scale? You reckon, TTRS?
Look,
A big
if
seven.
that was moderately well managed, it's probably probably a 5 or a 6. I go to. It's fairly extreme hourglassing. Normally, you don't see it as bad as that. I'm trying to find it. You'll find it. The guy cuts the top out of a cotton palm, and there's another one with a willy willy hitting one. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Never the brightest boy. Got to go to videos. But this video here, 48 seconds in length. This guy is going to cut. Look at that. Why? Oh. Now, that guy has got real gumption. He is amazing. I would not want to try that. But it gives you an idea of how much tensile strength they have. And they really are. You think about it. We use palm, for example, rattan or rattan is a palm fiber. It's very strong. When I was working in the UA, they make rope out of the little fibers at the base of the petioles of Phoenix dactylifera. So definitely got a lot of strength to them. They do fail, but it takes a fair hammering and other things fail. Jeremy, you have a little bit more exposure to palms in your end of the world. What's your experience?
In terms of strength?
And failures, yeah. Do you see them fail often?
I've had one Canariensis fail, and that was from a crush wound from when it was transplanted in, and parrot damage and rat damage and decay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just don't see them fail. They just don't fall over, or they don't break. Yeah. I think one that I can think of. Yeah.
They're gone.
Yeah, that's the only one I can think of is just the one. Yeah.
There was I'm trying to think of what it was. It was either a Strelitzia Nicolai or a traveller palm, which aren't palms.
Yeah.
That failed and killed a guy a young kid in Port Douglas or that end of the world about 10, 15 years ago.
I could see that on a traveller's palm. They tend to split out at the base sometimes.
Yeah, same with Strelitzia Nicolai. So, but palms are incredibly strong. Their tensile strength is just mind-boggling.
Well, and you know that when you're cutting them, you only need that one strand to hang on, and it just hangs on.
And you know it when you're trying to pull them out of the ground, which is why you see bruise marks on palms. And ideally, when we're transplanting palms, we should lift from underneath the root ball. It's a pain in the neck process, so we tend to avoid doing it. There's another hourglass. You can see that there. I would say, that's got a fair bit of weight on it, but it's had real problems. In that particular year, we had some 43-degree days towards the eastern coast of Sydney, and they were just enough to burn the howers. And I assume you have similar problems, Jeremy, once you get away from the coast.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, but that almost certainly a transplant relic there. And it just tells you that once you've moved them, you've really got to take care of them to avoid that. But if you do, you can treat them horribly. I mean, I've seen palms where they've cut every front off and had them still look good afterwards. And you think, wow, if you take care of them, they do okay. Okay, so that hopefully that answers your questions about palms.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
They do compartmentalize in spite of all our beliefs to the contrary. It's just that the tissue alignment is different than it is in our dicotyledonous trees. It's got no rays, so it's got wall 1 that's its weakest, and it's got wall 3 that's everything else, and that's it. It looks different, but it's similar. You get these tubes of decay rather than massive big hollows. And if you do damage or injury, the tree kills the adjacent cells. It's a programmed cell death, kills off adjacent cells and turns them woody and corky. Turns them really hard and really high levels of suberin to stop from damaging. So it does do its best to protect. We often think of them as simple, but from an evolutionary perspective, these are more advanced organisms. These came later down the line. So they're not necessarily pathetic or hopeless. Okay, so I can close that out and forget it all together. And we can close that one down. But now I've got to go to emails, Peter, and I don't think I've got it open. Thought I had. So we had a number of questions asked of us. And I have this little person that phones to ask their questions rather than sends them in by emails because he thinks he's got the ear of the coordinator. So some of those questions are interesting. One of those questions is, what's the situation at law when a tree is growing on 2 properties? And we've had some interesting discussions about that, so we will look at that. Okay. Someone says root investigation to determine if the tree will remain. Perhaps Mark can discuss how he would go about deciding if the tree will remain structurally sound. Root loss calculator, root trench, 4 times 4 centimeters, 3 times 3 centimeters. Colin, this is your question. Colin Fry, I trust.
Hi there.
Yeah, great. First of all, is it inside or outside the structural root zone?
Inside.
Inside the structural root zone?
1.7 meters from the center of the tree. The TPZ is 3.2. Or the structural root zone is 3.2.
It's a big tree.
It's girthy.
Biggish.
Cedrus.
Yeah, okay. There's
a photo in that email there.
Is there?
Down a bit.
Oh, yeah, sure is. Sorry, I didn't see that. It's a little close. I'd be a little bit more concerned. Soil types. Next question.
Soil type is road base, pretty much, in the trench. Previously excavated. Yeah.
What sort of soil was it before people came along and stuffed it up?
I think it's a bit clay. Clay loam.
So roots aren't going to be as deep. Now, it is a gymnosperm, and gymnosperms tend to have root systems that divide more frequently. And all of these are generalizations. I will find you exceptions to every rule that I give you. So don't, there's not a blanket. So for me, if that was mine, I'd say, look, let's give it a go and see if we could save it. I accept that's probably a hazard beam there already.
No, I don't think so.
No?
No, I had a pick at it. It's
okay. Just an unusual things. So I'd put a tree motion sensor on it.
That's what I recommended, actually. Yeah.
And, they're now playing with live tree motion sensors. I have one. I'm still trying to get my head past the old manual system in terms of recording and calibrating and presenting data. But the live one, you can say, look, if it's moved more than half a degree, which tends to be the the threshold, that it gives you alert, and you can look at what the winds were doing at that time and say, well, look, fair enough, it's 120 kilometre an hour gust of wind. We can accept that. Or you can say, boy, it was a 20 kilometre an hour wind. We can't accept that. We need to do some pruning of the tree. But that's the other thing, is why can we not do pruning of the tree?
Well, that big branch there could be pruned back. That could reduce a lot of weight, but potentially you're going to make it less flexible.
Yes, that's true. And so we have a risk of potentially making it have more static, or behave like a static mass rather than a dynamic mass, and that can have secondary consequences.
That weight is probably towards the trench. If it was to fall, it's probably going to fall the other direction, away from the trench.
I wish that were the case, but the evidence suggests that.
Oh, really?
Support is probably done by compression. But now here's the other thing: is we use a structural root zone in Australia without appropriate understanding, I think, in many cases. So the new standard has tried to clarify that it's indicative. It's the point at which we should investigate, which is exactly what you're doing, Colin. You're making some investigative activities here. And that's,
so what, can I ask, what sort of size roots would you expect to see this close? Because it had been previously disturbed, I'm pretty sure, and there was only a handful of small sort of 4 centimeter roots. So
did
recently,
you put it through 4 centimeter roots? I wouldn't be panicking about 4 centimeter roots.
No,
that looks about a 700 mil diameter, something like that.
Diameter 92 with that big branch there. Yeah.
Have you put that into a root loss calculator? Have a look.
Yeah, it's like 7% or something.
Yeah. So 7% is really not a big amount at all.
So 21 is what we're using as a.
We're using 1/3. If you imagine a circle,
a third, okay,
a round circle, and I don't know whether I can insert on this. No, I can't. But just imagine a round circle. If we had a 1/3 cavity in a tree, one third opening. So we've got an opening to the tree. It's lost 1/3. That 1/3 has got no roots on it. So it can lose 1/3 of the roots and not necessarily fall over. Now it's happening rapidly.
So not only that, Mark, you've got out to the other side of it, you've got undisturbed ground, which is you've got disturbed ground where you're vacuuming. So the logic would suggest you're going to have greater root development out the other side where it isn't disturbed.
Roots closer to the surface will be out there, but you may not necessarily have greater. And I don't know, is that concrete or bitumen surface, or is it just straight to the ground?
It's asphalt, so they cut the asphalt off.
Yeah,
they're just going down through the subbase.
So, for example, concrete's got a reasonable porosity. 20 MPa concrete's got about a 15% porosity. You can watch water go through it if you put it on slowly. You can see it drip out the bottom, and that's one of the reasons why we have problems with driveways and footpaths. Is we get water go through, it gets underneath. It gets hot during the day, it vaporizes, the concrete gets cooler at night, it condenses, and so we've got this little miniature irrigation system operating under the concrete, and that encourages root development there. Now we try and stop that by having a coarse aggregate underneath, but then we compact underneath that as well, and on footpaths we just put it straight on the surface, and of course footpaths are made to be broken by tree roots. They're not designed not to be broken.
So the theory is that you should have larger aggregates with porous air spaces in between. So when that dries out, the roots don't continue. Is that the theory?
I don't know what the answer is. My answer would be engineer footpaths so they can't be lifted by tree roots. But that costs more money. And so you get this dilemma of, do I spend more money? I know that you can run 150 mil, 32 MPa concrete with piers or anchors, and roots just cannot lift it. In fact, I will pull it up because it came in my communications today, a paper on this exact subject everyone refers to McLeod and Cram. I think that's fairly common thing to see. Report resources, pressure exerted by tree roots. It's fine, you come on. So Kozer et al. Did a paper, they looked at it, and the visuals, and there's one thing that I've learnt this week is that I'm not good at using visuals to communicate, and they certainly have. Assessing the limits of radial expansion in woody tree roots is the name of the paper. So you can go back to here. It's the same basic group of researchers that do a lot of the work. But here it is, just sits nicely under the 1 megapascal range. So 1 megapascal is our upper end range where we get lifting. So you can design a footpath to resist 1 megapascal pressure, and you're done. And we've been espousing McLeod and Cram, which is 680 to 860 or something like that kilopascals, and saying around 1 megapascal. So and it varies from this. He's only looked at 2 species, but it'll be in that range. It'll be in that order of magnitude. So there's another great little paper. It's public domain. I love what these guys are doing. Andrew in particular is promoting a new paper about every 4 weeks, where he's reading someone else's paper and having a look at it and explaining it, or giving a paper out, and it's just great information.
Where is this being published?
Oh, don't go there. Ask me technical questions. Assessing root limits and expansion of woody roots. Let's do this. I'll show you how I would do this because I'm a lazy man.
Oh, just what you're talking about this group of people publishing every week. What's that about?
I'm on a email list for it, and I don't know how I got on it.
Nice.
But if you want to, I would do this if I was going to quote it in a paper, because I'm a lazy person. I'd go there. I'd open up my Scholar link. You can just type in Scholar to get there. I'd type that in. I'd hit search. There it is. Cite the paper. I use the Harvard system. There it is. Copied and done.
Yeah, I've already got it. That's good.
So how to be lazy. That's my technique. I don't know whether anyone's got anything easier. You can save them into your Word, or if you're using Word, your Word document as references, and access them from there. But you saw how long that takes to do. It's just a matter of a few seconds. And then I have a whole pile of those already saved in a standard Word document that I can just go to, put it out of the Word document, and it's already a reference for me because I'm extra lazy. And I suggest you start collecting them. When you read a paper and you see something that's really interesting, go have a look at it and just keep on adding to your reference collection. It's so easy to do. It's an easy habit to get into. So just data, I can show you. Report resources, references. And so I have a list of references that are all ready to go, already formatted. All I've got to do is go in and grab them and so on. So it's nice and easy. Okay, that'll hopefully make your life a little, I would say 50% of my references are repeat references, regular references. I would say, as in, 1 in every 3 or 4 documents. I would say less than 5% are unique references that are only used in a particular paper for some particular reason, or a particular report for some particular reason. So keeping them in one spot makes good sense. I don't know how we got onto that. Oh, well, yeah, I know. Roots. We're looking at root systems. Did I close that down? I did. Bad man. So I'm happy with 1/3 gone. I'm happy with the tree motion sensor. Why a tree motion sensor? I just think, Colin, there's still not enough that we know. There's still some degree of uncertainty. And because of that uncertainty, I think it's nice to have some, but the size of the roots you're cutting are nothing.
Yeah, pretty disturbed, I think.
So I'd be really surprised if you got any increase in movement. And if you really want to have some good fun, test it before and test it after. So
what's the brand of the motion sensors? Is it the Picus?
there are a whole pile coming onto the market. There's simply a accelerometer, an XYZ accelerometer, and I'm getting mine from a guy called Kane Holstein. Kane's a lovely fellow who's a technology freak and an arborist. Active Trees, so it's Simon and Active has some that we're getting close to being ready. So yeah, there are a number of different ones on the market that you can go and have a play with.
Thank you.
I'm still, as I said, still on the old original Ken James ones. I love them. They're badly designed, but I'm familiar with them, and it's one of those things that I'm finding it hard to swap over. I will get there. Anything else on that, Colin? Let me go back to the comment, and you can see there's roots all the way through here as well. Yeah, that's nothing.
There was a couple big ones on this side as well too that had been
These
taken
have
out.
been damaged beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's the tree do
12
in response to that?
I think, like Jeremy said, it's probably just going to reallocate the resources up the hill where there's prime soil.
Yeah, look, it's going to do that in part. Those roots back in behind will start to grow. Every root starts off as what we call a pioneer root or a young root tip exploring, and most of those die. And as I said, in the case of gymnosperms, they tend to have root systems that divide more rapidly, tend to be what we used to use the word more fibrousy, or, you know, they've lots of little roots rather than big roots. So, again.
So Mark, where you get that damage, as it dies back a little bit, do you get the parenchyma de-differentiating and then throwing out more lateral roots from that point?
Both. This is one of those ones where, and I think Peter's work shows this, is this would have been better covered and allowed to stimulate, because there was callus in the end there, and callus would have formed. But new roots generate all the time. So if we go back to our tree up here, the roots started off here were tiny. You know, they were a cedar, maybe a millimeter in diameter, pushing through the soil. Then after that tip comes through, there's some root hairs behind. They last for a few weeks unless they become mycorrhizal. And then they either harden up, turn woody and survive, or they don't. And then most small woody roots die. And we end up with the root growing through here. Well, this area still got leaf litter falling and still got debris accumulating. So over time, a new pioneer root starts in off that and keeps growing, and again. And that process is a reoccurring thing. For that reason, if you go, and the Victorians will relate to this more, if you go and do a drench for, say, elm leaf beetle, you'll drench in close to the trunk, because that's where the highest intensity of absorbing roots are. It's not where most of them are, it's just the density is highest close in. So they don't grow out, become woody, and then have nothing else in behind here. In behind here, there are still lots of small little roots, new ones, younger ones that are, you know, maybe 5 years old, a year old, a few weeks old, as well as the bigger, older root that's there, that's probably the size of that tree in Tasmania, probably 90 years or so old.
Can I just ask one last question? In terms of root mapping, is there sometimes where it's essential to create a map, like a diagram of the location?
Very
Something-
rarely. So the original standard talk about it, root investigations. The current standard still calls it root investigation. And where there is a geospatial issue, you may need to. So, for example, if you're thinking of peering through here, knowing where they are will be important. If you're going to cut through there, knowing where they are is completely moot. I mean, you know, it's absurd to go and draw any form of three-dimensional reputation because you are cutting through them.
Yep.
Now, the exception would be is if you're looking at a strip footing, but the engineer said to you, look, we could elevate a portion of that strip footing up 200 mils, then knowing what depth they were at might be critical, and where they are. But in general, if you're doing a strip excavation or a trench excavation, where they fit has very little difference.
Yep.
It might be good to note that, you know, most of them tended to be at X depth, or they generally were, you know.
Yep.
But
Mark,
So
I thought one of the reasons for route mapping was to be able to like count them without you know, digging up and checking where they were or how many there were, rather than where they were, how many there were.
yeah, look, I think the reason route mapping is there is because it's a good way to get arborist extra work. And I don't mean that in a ridiculing manner, but in a real manner that, you know, the original standard, Australian standard, looked like, let's get work for arborists.
I think that the main reason for route mapping is that the concerned authority insists on it.
They insist upon it because, again, we haven't done a good job in education, and we've tried to communicate in the latest rendition is that, you know, certainly for up to a major encroachment, so minor or moderate, we normally wouldn't expect a root investigation to be done. A moderate encroachment occurs when you're at 6 times trunk diameter, tangent at 6 times trunk diameter of the tree. You know, one tangent at 6 times trunk diameter are going to be so rare that you're going to have anything affected in terms of either health or stability that you could just ignore it. Now, I know Andrew Benson from New Zealand will probably hear this, and he'll be on the phone and beating me up and saying, but there is a physiological response. The answer is yes, there is. It does have an effect. Like pruning off 30% of the canopy has an effect on the tree. But it's not an irrecoverable impact. And Hamilton talks about this in 1984. He says, you know, major root cutting will usually not cause the long-term death of the tree. And he calls major root cutting up to 50%.
Oh.
That's pretty intense. I don't think we should do that. And then the real answer, Colin, is if this was do this, reduce the tree or remove the tree, I would say there's a no-brainer deal, reduce the tree and retain it. You know, this business about cutting trees down because we're too close to the problem. Jeremy, you've got something to say.
Yeah, I've used route mapping for 2 reasons. One, exactly as you said, to put piers in where we were right up close to trees, and we've done that several times. Unless you can put it in a format that can be shared across other consultants, it's completely useless. So unless you've got it in a drawing format that they can XREF in their drawings and design their piers around, having it as an image out there on a report is ridiculous. The other thing I've used it for is to convince people to move things away from trees, is to say, look, there's all these roots here, you need to move it away a little bit. So to help inform design, it can be handy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so let's got Colin out of the way. We're making progress, Peter. And I think we've dealt with that one. So we had this one coming in.
That's the same
Dealt
thing,
with
I
that
think.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just another job, same thing. I've got all my answers.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay. Mark, Could you explain why trees and other plants don't establish well in subsoil, especially on steep banks, typically cuttings in the side of roadways? And they do, but they don't. It depends on what we're looking at growing. And I mean, if you go to the Northern Rivers and have a look at camphor laurels, oh my, they'll grow out of almost anything, I'm sure of it. Ficus definitely will. But a part of the problem is you've got this slope that doesn't hold water. And so everything runs off, including propagules. So the stuff that you want to, your seed and all of that ends up washed off the bank. If you go along the M4 freeway in Sydney, the one that goes from Penrith to Sydney, you'll see where they did dig in and have steep embankments, and they've drilled in, they've punched holes in and been quite successful at getting things growing. The second stage of that is subsoils are often not as rich in solutes, in chemicals. So they've got some chemicals, but they're often deficient. And so getting some organic material going, and that happens over time on embankments, you'll end up with your grasses and things like that starting to build up organic material, and it'll get going. It's the same process, I guess, as why you don't see plants growing on sand dunes. The water's there, but it disappears quickly in that case, and it's missing solutes. But you do see sand dunes progress and develop, and you end up seeing small trees grow, organic material catches up, they get bigger and bigger, and eventually you end up with dunes that are well colonized and areas of land increasing as a result of that. So it's not that you can't do it, it's that it takes more work than just your typical, plant 1,000 tubes, expect 500 to survive, because the slopes are more problematic.
I did find a document from the New South Wales roads that talks about establishing vegetation on cut banks on roadsides. I've just had a look for it and I can't seem to find it, but I'm happy to share that.
I'd love to see it. And what was its conclusion, Peter?
They're using hydromulch a lot, but it's a little bit more complicated than at first glance. So the slope and the soil type and so forth comes into it, and they would adjust the composition of the hydromulch accordingly.
Yeah. So that hydromulch is doing two things. One is allowing for more water to be caught, and secondly was starting that biological process. So soil is largely a biological material. Sea horizon is not a biological material. It takes time, but it will form and break down in a relatively short process. I mean, I remember many years ago in America going to a lecture by a landscape architect from Bob Collins, who had looked at landscape projects on a resort in the Big Island, I'm pretty sure it was. There'd been a volcanic eruption about 15 years beforehand, and they were starting to deal with beautiful soils within that 15-year period. It started to develop. We often talk about soils taking hundreds and thousands of years in Australia, and the area where we talk about that's applicable is not the rainforest, is not the moderate rainfall areas of the coast, it's the inland. The further inland you get, the longer it takes. Water is a high limiting factor in soil formation, because organic material is a part of soil formation.
I think Australian soils are, well, not unique, but unusual compared to a lot of other countries in the world, because ours are so old. I was really surprised when I saw soils in Japan, which have got quite young soil, how they could treat them totally differently. So the farmers would rotary hoe 2 or 3 times a year, every year for years and years, and never form a hard pan.
Different soil texture as well. So
that's right.
And so that's right. All these things are going to have an influence. So, if you've got a nice cutout and a nice cragnosome clay like you have in your end of the world, that's not the same as a cutout in a very sandy loam coastal area, and certainly not the same as hitting shale in the Waianae Shale areas of Sydney. Once you get that shale, it's it's soft, it degrades, but it takes a little bit more effort to get things to grow. And having said that, you can drive anywhere and see trees that have done just an amazing job of just getting a root in, getting going. And I'm surprised the cuts going from Sydney to Gosford, the sandstone, so a little bit harder material. And my son was involved in some of that work. They'd go along with Tree Serve and they'd be cutting the trees off the sandstone cuts where they'd germinate in a little crevice or a little crack. And they'd end up with some fairly reasonable sized trees growing on essentially what appears to be almost nothing. And if you go to Hong Kong, you'll see the same thing with figs, the wall trees growing all the way around in Kowloon Bay, end of the world. So, yeah, it definitely is an issue. So does that answer the question satisfactory enough for you, Peter?
Yes, thank you.
Good. We'd had the discussion beforehand, so just want to make sure I'd redone it. Vicky asks, could I have some discussion about root barriers? Some councils do specify them for street area plantings. I was absolutely not in favour of them until I saw them working successfully. And then I thought, oh, okay, I've got to really rethink my position. They were used in Ropes Crossing, which is a new suburb adjacent to me, built it within a national park. And they put spotted gums in small openings with roads and footpaths beside. And I know that when they did the same thing in another suburb just nearby, Penrith Council were removing the trees within 20 years because of the amount of damage they've done. The Ropes Crossing ones are now getting up to the 20-year mark and there's not even lifting. The only thing that's been lifted is the barrier that they were put in with. So the roots are definitely growing and things are definitely pushing that barrier up. And they just used a heavy plastic and wrapped it around and buried the things. They buried planted, so they planted deep, about probably 400 or 500 mils down, and I just haven't seen any damage yet. So for all the things that I would say are wrong, it seems to be working really well. And lots of people have done trials on this. There have been trials that show that it's somewhat dependent on the species of tree. Some trees, the roots will go down underneath the barrier, grow straight back up, and continue like almost as though they've grown through the barrier, except they've gone down and up, and they'll continue on. And it's just to do with how they do things genetically. Other trees will put their roots down. The one thing that I think does help in encouraging deep roots is water. And the one thing that I always shake my head at with amazement is that little bit of ag line that goes down in and around the bottom of the planting hole in council plantings has been shown to encourage deeper roots. And deeper roots means greater distance between the roots and the hard surface. The more distance between the roots and the hard surface, the less likely the hard surfaces are to be damaged. And the reason that works is you get, if you say 100 mil diameter per r squared, that's 50, 52, 50. For every metre and a half, you've got about a litre of water. So if you put in, 2 litres or 3 litres rapidly surged into the bottom of that root ball when they're irrigating, at least we've got some water there. If you're just watering off the top, like we often see watering, it might only soak down, a centimetre or 2 centimetres, and the rest runs off. It's almost been superfluous. So those ag line planting areas often used to aerate are in fact more useful in encouraging deeper root development and encouraging moisture to go down deeper. Remember that moisture stimulates root development. Roots grow towards the optimum moisture gradient. And yes, I would have said, and Peter, I think you were there with me when we dug up a spotted gum that had been hit by a vehicle in Ropes Crossing. I think we put it on top of Nick and took a photograph.
I remember that tree I think he just pushed it over, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, it fell on Nick or something, and he ended up underneath it.
yes, we put it on top of him. But yes, it had been hit by a vehicle beforehand, which is why we pushed it to failure, or dug it and pushed it to failure. And it was at least 400 to 500 mils deeper than it should have been. And it's just turned out well. And I think I mentioned previously, I was in the zoo at in Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh, the southern city, isn't it?
That's
You know?
right. They do have quite a big zoo. Yep.
And planting araucarias in at the second world, and sitting there thinking, no, but they say, well, okay, let's get on with this. So I'm not sure that we've necessarily got everything figured yet. Every time I come up with an idea, something's going to mock me. So yes, look, I think root barricades have a value, but they're not an answer by themselves. I think you've got to have appropriate soils, appropriate after maintenance. So I don't think you can rely on just the one component, Vicky. Any questions on that?
I had Blacktown City Council. I had to do a tree planting plan for a subdivision, and it was roadside planting, and they specified exactly which trees, where they had to go, and they specified root barriers, but they didn't specify any watering, but it was quite narrow, not a lot of room for the trees.
Yeah,
But yeah, the landscape officer, gave me something and said, this is how you do it. This is how it's got to be done.
yeah.
No choice.
And Ropes Crossing was one of those as their first really big one in a number of years, and it's been incredibly successful. So next time you're out that end of the way, go and have a look at it, and you'll see where the barricades are being pushed up out of the ground.
Okay.
But the adjacent hard surfaces have been left alone. The plan was to remove most of the maculatas there about 10 years ago because of the damage they're going to do. The plan is still there, I believe, to eventually remove them. But they'll be doing it because the trunk has outgrown the space, not because the roots have caused any damage, which is why they removed the ones in Cranebrook, because the roots were lifting the surfaces. So
Yeah.
if it gives us another 30 or 20 years out of a planting, I think it's a worthwhile endeavour.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. I think we've dealt with that one. No, that's no. Rob sent through some photos. That's not the ones that Rob sent. Okay, Rob.
Yeah.
You asked a horrible question. You said, "What the hell is this?" And that's
No, I
was my
didn't.
answer. Oh, wasn't it yours? Whose was this?
No, it is mine.
Ah,
But so the history of this is that I live in Port Melbourne, which is part of the city of Port Phillip, and the arboricultural feature of the city of Port Phillip is the Canary Island date palms. We've got absolutely hundreds of them, but one by one they're dying with the Fusarian wilt.
yep.
So I determined to look for some remedy for this disease. And so back during the COVID epidemic, some people, I think including Donald Trump, suggested that a product called ivermectin had an impact on COVID, which of course is a virus, not a fungus.
Yep.
But I thought, I know ivermectin is a powerful drug. Originally, I think, developed from a fungus in Japan, and it's used by farmers to kill gastrointestinal worms in livestock.
Yep.
And the active ingredient is ivermectin, but it's called Ivermec. And the Ivermec kills both live worms and worm eggs. And so I thought, maybe it's worth having a go at killing fungus with this particular product. So,
Okay, so yeah, you've tried things. Have you tried it on a Phoenix palm yet?
well, I haven't, because I can't get any cooperation from the city council in
So
the Port Phillip.
let's have a look at things. So I can give you some answers on some of this. The first thing is there is a Phytophthora that affects coconuts in Hawaii and Oahu, and they were injecting into the stems. We examined it with them and we said, look, you can probably get the same results by injecting into the petioles. So we had them inject into petioles, and that was shown to be somewhat effective. But the first thing to know is efficacy. And so what you'd want to do is start doing some research. And there are lots of things we try and control inside trees that are really hard to get to. In terms of controlling Fusarium, there are some systemic fungicides that are already approved for control of some species or some forms of Fusarium oxysporum. But thanks, Darren. Those fungicides are nasty. I have one in the lab, and it comes with a warning that it can cause sterility in males. My wife said I should apply it, not our sons. But that's pretty scary when you think about things. So,
well, with this one, I did have a talk with just lost my track. Sorry.
Somebody at Port Phillip?
No one at Port Phillip will talk to me. I had a talk with oh, you know him well. Craig Hallam.
Oh, yep.
And Craig suggested to me, well, all right, you can, because I injected this particular branch with 10 mil of Ivermec, and it did appear to kill the fungi. But he suggested to me that if I can kill one fungus, it might well kill the beneficial fungi as well. So he said maybe just leave it alone.
Yeah, look, I would be cautious about using anything that you don't have efficacy data for without a research permit in Victoria, because you're obligated to follow that protocol. Very liberal in comparison. I think, Jeremy, you're much the same in Queensland. If there's efficacy data and you have insurance, professional indemnity, you can apply the chemical in an appropriate manner without it being on label. Is that right?
That's the way I understand it. Yes.
Yeah, that's the way I understand it. In New South Wales, we must follow the label. Tasmania, you must follow the label. Just so you know for that down there, Colin. But look, I mean, every arborist that's trying to deal with big problems has probably tried different things. I know that polyphagous shot-hole borer has been a big issue in Western Australia of late.
But also watching Landline last Sunday, the Western Australian government has given up trying to control the shot-hole borer.
Yep.
And now they're just trying to contain it.
They'd lost it 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So,
but I don't know what they've been trying to control it with.
Lots of things, and there's been all sorts of talk on research. There's been talk on using different chemicals. there has been some success in localized control, but these what we call a panacea or something that's going to be a magical solution, they're few and far between in medicine, let alone anything else. If you want to come up with something to cure something, come up with a cure for cancer, and then decide what colour jet you're going to have every day for the next year and order all 365 of them. The likelihood that by chance we'll come up with a solution by random is pretty low. So I wouldn't hold your breath for it, but by all means trial things, but make sure you're trialing in an environment that is appropriate. So the way to do it would be to get some young saplings, give them or young palms, maybe in 20-litre container, something like that. Inoculate them with Fusarium oxysporum, which is pretty easy to do, and then try controlling the situation in a plot rather than trying it with full-scale trees, or find some efficacy data. And so to look for efficacy data, you go ivermectin, fungicide, Fusarium. And if you can find something there in a paper that says that there's been some, then in Victoria, you're allowed to start going and playing some games with it.
I can't find anything like that.
Yeah. Then Robert, really, you're stuck with a limited amount of what you can do. By all means, play, but be careful that you don't get yourself in a situation. Now, having said that, ivermectin is used to treat mites, for example, and insects, and it works well as an injectable because it is a water-soluble chemical. So, and I can say the best results I've ever seen on controlling mites and brachychitins with ivermectin. Does a brilliant job. So, but just be careful that you're following label.
But
Okay.
well, it's certainly off label what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But the City of Port Phillip is doing their own research, and I was hoping that they would have a go with my product as well, but they won't cooperate with me. So.
Look, there was some serious work done out of Western Australia on the control of polyphagous shot-hole borer. A couple of people, including a reasonably well-respected research scientist, said, look, we'd like to try some stuff. And they just hit the wall, and that was it. And that's it. Look, the best way to control Fusarium in palms is practicing good hygiene. Good hygiene's probably 75% of the battle. And unfortunately, everyone thought it wasn't going to get down to Melbourne. I saw it down there in 2011. So you only have to prune one palm and then prune the rest of the palms in the street, and you've potentially spread it to every one of them.
Yeah.
And
but also we suspect the possums spread it too.
Less so, and so do rats and birds, but again, less so. The worst spread is by people, and you can see that where this particular form of species, this is Fusarium oxysporum canariensis, where this was first described from was Centennial Park, and there are still great palms in Randwick and that end of the world, all from the same time, but it was that process of pruning the palms regularly in Centennial Park and contaminating and cross-contaminating before they realised they had the problem. And you can pick up from the PDO where there is Fusarium, and you've just got to be aware of that being the case. So practice great hygiene all the time. Guys, Peter was going to talk about, Peter and I were going to talk about who owns the tree when it's on joint property, but I think we're going to hold that off till next time. I'll just open it up to any questions from the floor, just for the next 15 minutes. If there's anything, I'll answer them now. Anyone got anything? Right. Then Peter, what do you say we call it quits?
Yeah, I'm happy to leave it until next time. I don't mind stopping now.
Andy, were you about to say something?
Yeah, just I submitted a query about some flooded gums that were shedding a lot of dead wood in current high winds. And I was a bit alarmed when I went to one of our parks and found all these sticks poking out of the ground. It looked like a Roman siege of arrows had struck the ground, and I was just really glad that no one had been around. There's 2 playgrounds surrounding this bare area where the flooded gums. And I'm not going to cut the utes out, but it's just, I've seen in Sydney in the major gardens in the parks where they'll just have a sign saying, "Don't walk under these trees when it's windy." Is that sufficient sort of warning to our public of the hazard that may be there?
I think that's potentially a help. But we looked at this before, and I don't know that I can find the image quickly enough. But trees that grow in closed forests, or eucalypts that grow in closed forests, I believe have a tendency to get rid of branches more frequently than or more readily than others by having an almost cladoptic system of letting what they Manic cause ray attack to occur. So it's aims at shedding whole branches, and then when they're dead, it also sockets them out more readily. So Saligna, Grandis, blackbutt, those sort of closed forest species tend to do that a little bit more often than our woodland species. And in spite of that, the number of people that are killed by falling branches is comparatively low. And in fact, I did do the process, and I think I can do it quickly now.
I tend to remember looking at the number of people that have been killed by dead branches, and that was even lower than the number by trees. Really low, in fact.
Yeah, look, it is low. And the number by trees is low. That's the first thing. We're really small numbers. Yeah, here it is. Jessica did this wonderful graphic up for me the other day, and I read this wonderful paper on communicating risk. The risk was low and the public perception was high, and said visuals do an important job. So this is mortality rate per million from melanomas, driving, asthma, murder, choking on food. Now, I want you to think about that. This means that either you get everything done from NutriBullet from here on in, or you take a risk of dying that is substantially higher than accidental tree failure. So eating is a dangerous process. And I challenge anyone to decide that they're going to give up eating for the rest of their life. I know Mahatma Gandhi said that he was going to do that, but it's an essential process that we go through. And we came up with this the other day. Someone else was talking about it, and you think about these things. That really is eye-opening. I know falling off a bed, I understand. And if you take out, and I'm a fair person, children and the elderly out of that, you still get 60% of those. In other words, you're still getting better than 4 a year, or 3 to 4 a year. 3 or 4 per million. That's 100 a year. People dying, choking on food that are in the low-risk group. Eating is truly dangerous. And we should have a warning on every bit of food that says caution may cause choking hazard. Or maybe we're just overreacting. We're not communicating about trees well at all, because the risk is so small that I wonder how we do it as a profession. Colin, All of the rest, apart from the choking, are from my original paper on accidental tree deaths. This one is from Australian data that we added in this week. And by all means, let me know and I'll happily flick you. But it's a really good way to communicate to people. Driving, people say, well, I have to drive. And I say, yeah, but you could drive with a full face helmet on. I know that reduces risk. Look where driving sits. It's just enormous. And I was asked this question by a barrister just this week, last week. The barrister said to me, should there be signs up? Exactly the same question, and I said to him, do you think there should be warnings on cars that says caution, the driving cars is dangerous, do not drive? I think that's really almost saying the same thing as trees. The benefits they provide, I would say take the risk and be underneath them, except during severe weather. And it's in severe weather events that I think most people know branches fail. And I don't mean it seriously, but I mean it somewhat seriously. And that is, if it gets rid of the dumb ones, well, then it's probably done a bit of a public service in terms of cleaning up the human genome. Now, I don't mean that realistically, but sort of, Andy, go on.
I'm sorry, as a risk manager for the council I work for, while I was mildly alarmed when I saw these hundreds of sticks poking some 3 or 4 inches into the soil from where they'd fell, then I was getting reports from a fellow up the road where they'd cracked all these roof tiles, and same species, same tree.
Yeah.
And so just remind me of the potential force they did have. They may not kill someone, but 2 playgrounds and a children's learning area in the middle of this field of planted inappropriately, probably flooded gums.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But again, let's go the other side, the benefits. Let's just say that each of those trees has a canopy area of maybe 100 square metres. In a nice green area like you're in, that might be $2 a square metre each year of life-saving health benefits. So they're giving you $200 worth of benefits. What's the detriment they're giving, and where does that weigh up? And when it comes to trees, we often calculate just one part of the equation, and I think that's unfortunate. We don't say, look, it's reduced asthma. It reduces melanoma. Melanoma is more dangerous than driving. It reduces road deterioration. It reduces heat deaths. More people have been killed by our worst heat wave since white invasion. More people were killed in that one heat wave than have been killed by trees since white people came to Australia. One day, one heat wave.
I agree with you, Mark. I just wondered whether is a sign recognised as an appropriate treatment?
Yeah, look, I think signs are a nice way to say, look, be aware that trees can and do drop parts, particularly during inclement weather, however how you want to word that. Ultimately,
I think it's a problem with putting signs up warning people against trees, because my view is the last thing you want to do is make people even more afraid of trees than they already are, because that's got other unfortunate effects.
I think
okay, thank you. I appreciate that input. I've just
give it up with the balance, Andrew, and that is you've got to say, yep, they can do this, but the benefits are shade, particular filtration, reduce obesity, reduce Alzheimer's, reduce dementia, reduce respiratory disease. The list just goes on and on and on and on. There's some great papers on the subject produced by an Australian author of all things. You talk about the benefits, you say they way outweigh the risk provided.
Yeah.
So educational signs rather than necessarily straight warning signs.
Yeah. No, I take some example from Sydney City Council when I visit there. and just had seen in Centennial Park that they posted similar signs, and I saw that as a means of them, trying to shift blame off themselves if someone did get hurt. But and I was just looking for whether that's relevant.
I think you get a whole pile of extra defence out of it. But I again, last Friday, I was asked this very group of questions, and a person had died, been killed by a tree part, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go and have a look at the area for the following 3 days. Now, everyone knew about the fatality. There were several thousand people that were using the facility, and there they were, all under the canopy of the trees. It was a hot summertime event, and I'm sitting there thinking, yes, even when they knew someone had just been killed by a tree branch, they still sat in the shade, they still played in the shade, they still spent time underneath the canopies, even with that stark immediate notice. So my answer is the signs go up, and then if I go to Hyde Park, I see people going through those areas with strong winds blowing and storms going on. It's just there's less, and one of the reasons there's less is nobody wants to get sopping wet. So fewer people tend to go through that area during bad weather, but people still do. They also go through quicker, so they've got little less exposure. But the number of incidences in this country, so we talk about deaths, but we go to serious injuries, and serious injuries means, or we use that specifically to mean spend a night or more in hospital. So that's everything from a suspected concussion to quadriplegia. That ratio is about 6 to 1 at its worst. We suspect it's less than that, but there's so little data. There's not enough deaths from trees. One of the criticisms that we got of the paper was that, there's not statistical meaningfulness to it because the numbers are too small. We need more people to die to get the data. And unfortunately, it's going to be like that for a long period of time. Worldwide, it's the same sort of situation. A big fear of a very small risk, and largely because of how we communicate. And, certainly I say to people, look, you're more likely to be killed by a bed by a factor of 12. But when you see that versus that, or that versus melanomas, that's really stark contrast.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just, to finish, I'll just say, like, in my role with council, if I'm walking around and I can see any degree of risk, I've got to at least acknowledge that. And
so I'll play devil's advocate. When you're driving around at council, do they make you wear a full face helmet? Have you got everyone at council wearing a full face helmet? No. When you're driving around, you see a sign that says 60, because you've got to drop that down to 10. You don't deal with all risks. It's not possible. We are born with a sexually transmitted terminal disease called life. The whole process is about risk until you're dead. Everything up until the time of death is about risk. And we can't eliminate it except by death. So I think you've got to be very careful when you talk about risks to talk about something that's substantial and real. If this was talked about in the tolerability of risk framework, this is fanciful. Now, if you got there and someone said my mic's off, thanks. How is my mic on?
It's on.
I can hear you.
Oh, you found Mark?
Can you? Okay, great. Look, we really have been, as Peter says, we've been brought into the equation ourselves as saying we're going to deal with any risk. But I've yet to meet anyone except Westpac, I think, had a meteorite impact protection frame on one of its buildings at one stage. But nobody protects against meteorites. And meteorites sits... you're laughing. Don't laugh at me. Meteorites sit a little bit higher than this and sit about there for death.
I'm often make the observation to people when I'm talking about this that just because a risk is obvious, it doesn't make it high. And I think that's the confusion that.
Yes, exactly. We grossly overestimate the small risk because we think of it, but you know, we do this without even thinking about it. And within your council area, Andy, and I remember giving a training program in New Zealand, and we're looking at trees, and I asked how many of the council staff had done an advanced driving course, and I said, well, there we are. That's not in those terms, but in numerical terms, there's risk control. It's because we don't see the thing. Now, when you have the first fatality at your workforce from driving, then things start to change and we start to bring in new rules. Same with influenza. I say all the time that one of the best investments, I'll pay for any of my staff to go down to the doctors and I'll pay for the influenza shot because that's a lot bigger risk. Would I think it was responsible if you saw stuff that you could readily deal with cost effectively, Andy? No. In other words, if you had a big dead branch that somebody could throw a throw ball over and pull the dead branch off and do that in a couple of minutes and it was over a play area, I think that's responsible. But if you have to go out and chase every bit of deadwood in your council area that overhangs the road, you're screwed. You've not got enough money. And the arborist will get rich. We'll thank you and we'll keep on telling you we've got to do it. But the reality is, I don't think there's a council that can afford it.
Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, informative educational science. I think it's about telling people that trees come with an element of risk, but their benefits far outweigh the risk. But they should exercise caution during conditions when things might fail. I think that's reasonable. Any other questions, guys?